Oh, there it is.
That
Yeah.
was smooth, seamless.
Hey,
Three
yeah,
cheers for
we've had much
technology.
worse.
Worth the wait, man. I don't see you, but I see me. I don't know what's happening. Am I where I need to be?
Yeah.
You sure are.
All right.
You can't see us?
No, I can only see myself.
Interesting.
Uh,
And now Mike was loading a little bit, but hey,
Here.
Kim goes, "Is this my
Is this
space?"
my space? Yes.
no,
Yes. Perfect way to kick this off.
this is your space.
This is everyone's
This is
space. Yes. Yes. This is
this,
This
story
is,
time.
yeah.
this is our space.
Yes. 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 Ken, thanks for joining, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
thanks
get.
for
having
your second appearance.
right. My
Wait.
second one.
Wait. Wait.
If
We
this
gotta
keeps
talk
up,
about.
I'm gonna be
Hold
famous.
on. Hold on. Hold on. We gotta talk about this for a second. When was the first time?
I want to say it was like 4 months ago, maybe five. I don't remember. But I think it was right after you guys started doing the IG Live thing. You were like,
We
we're just going to keep doing it and see who shows
we
up.
started
And I,
doing the IG live. Oh, maybe. Wait, but this is your this is your first time, your second time joining, but your first time being a host, like a co-host on it. Correct?
my second speaking time.
Oh man, I'm floored by this. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I don't recall. We've been
Kind
doing
of a
this for a
mess
year.
out here. We're kind of a mess. That's all right. That's all
Yeah,
right.
this is all,
I made such a great impression of you
this is
guys.
just it's another story for story time.
Yeah.
You know?
And then let's not forget the commercial. I was in that
Oh,
too.
of
No,
course.
Yeah.
that I
Yeah,
know.
You
Okay,
guys are making me famous. That's what's happening.
I love it.
that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
grocery store. Can you be left alone at this point, or are the paparazzi
I,
so overwhelming
I'm going to need a
that
security detail, man. I posted about that
that's
earlier.
what I figured.
This keeps
You can't
up,
leave the house in sweatpants. Yeah, sorry we've done
right?
that to you.
Shades and everything.
Exactly. So I was looking for a grinder. I don't know how it ended. We're versatile, Kim. So
Yeah.
anyway, but this is basically it. So okay, thank you once again
Yeah.
for coming. It's lovely to see your face. Sad and I are excited about this.
Thank you.
Um, I figured the format today can be a little lay of the land. There's talk on the inspection ruling coming
Yeah.
to fruition. There's been back and forth on what that rule contains.
Yeah.
So if you can enlighten us on that. And then, of course, there's the inevitable, like, how are they going to make this stick? What does it mean
Yeah.
for buyers and sellers? But, like, how do you enforce this rule
Hmm.
besides not allowing like a waive on the offer itself? So,
Yeah.
Ken, give us a little
Okay.
history of this and where we're at right now.
Sure. Yeah. So for those who don't know, it's been a seller's market for, I want to say, 5 years, maybe a little longer. And as a result of that, a lot of buyers, there was many buyers and few sellers, and buyers were trying to compete and stand out against each other. And so it started becoming a common thing for the buyer in the written offer to purchase to waive the inspection contingency. So there's usually four contingencies in an offer to purchase: inspection, mortgage, a couple others. And some buyers were putting all cash offers in, way over asking. And so this waiving of the inspections became really common. And that was going on for a while. And what that did was prompt one of the home inspector associations to come up with the idea of getting someone to sponsor in the state House of Representatives or Senate to sponsor new legislation that would give the buyer the right to have a home inspection. And the way it was originally worded was like a 2-page double-spaced document, and it was the gist of it was that if the seller accepted an offer, the buyer could then say, "I want an inspection," and the seller could not refuse the inspection, and the seller could not make the acceptance or rejection of an offer based on whether or not the buyer was going to waive. And so it was very squishy at first and very confusing, and there was a lot of misinformation going around in the early stages of this, some of which has stuck around. But this was over 2 years ago that this process started. So fast forward to August of last year, I think August 2nd, the governor signed into law the housing bond bill, and there was this rider in that bond bill for this home inspection legislation. And as it started going through the House and Senate, MAR, the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, came out very strongly against it. They felt that it would hurt the market, hurt sellers, and that it would leave this open and add time to the process, because originally there was a stipulation that the buyer could have 10 days after accepting the offer to say if they want to have a home inspection. So that was one of MAR's sticking points. And they also didn't like, in their view, the seller being forced into a contractual obligation that they weren't being forced into before. And so there's a lot of back and forth about it. Some of the early language, a lot of the early language got struck from the final signed thing. Some of the early stuff included penalties against the seller and against the seller's agent for violating the proposed regulation. It was like a percentage of the sale price and all this crazy stuff. So there was some really strong feelings on both sides of it, and eventually it got signed in a kind of slimmed down version. And then the confusion started when most people were basing what they believed on the very small little paragraph in this like hundreds of page long housing bill that really wasn't clear. So there was a lot of back and forth. When it got signed into law, MAR was still against it. They circulated a petition amongst the members, realtor members, to asking Governor Healy to veto it, but she ended up signing it. And then it went to this Executive Office of Housing something, this like 5-letter acronym committee that was responsible for actually promulgating the regulations. So that's where we are now. They've just finished that process. There was a public comment period. They've stripped it down. There was a lot of negotiation with MAR. So MAR had some really good input. They had some really strenuous pushbacks, but the end result is, where it stands today is that the committee doing the regulations gave MAR an extension, the Massachusetts Association of Realtors an extension to have to actually start abiding by the regulations. So the effective date is October 15th of this year. It was, when it was signed in August of last year, was originally supposed to go into effect December of last year. That completely fell apart because nobody was prepared to implement it. Then it was supposed to be June, and now it's October. And I'm confident October 15th is real. I've been closely watching this, and I've been talking to lots of people that I know, some of the folks who are involved in the committee side of things. So I believe October 15th is real. And where it stands now is MAR is working on educating realtor members about what the process will look like, and they're coming up with some new forms. So it's a long-winded lead up to answer your question, Mike, about how will this be enforced and what will it look like. That's been a lot of the confusion, and I think there's pretty good clarity about that now. And the way what's going to happen is there's going to be a new offer to purchase. Yay! Just when we thought we were used to, or you thought you were used to the new offer to purchase form around compensation language, now there's going to be a new form that does not have an inspection contingency in that offer to purchase. So the new process is such that the buyer doesn't say anything about whether or not they want a home inspection when they make the written offer. There's still going to be a mortgage contingency. There's still going to be, I think, a rate on termite, whatever it is. Appraisal, that was the appraisal gap is another one that people were waiving. So all those other contingencies are still there, but the inspection contingency is going to be removed. So MAR has come up with a new offer to purchase form. So that's the first big change. So what will happen is buyers and their agent will make the offer with this new form. The seller will accept or reject the offer. And in that communication between buyer and seller agents, the buyer agent is not allowed to say anything to the seller about whether or not their buyer intends to waive or intends to exercise their right to have an inspection. They're not supposed to give any hints. They're not supposed to say anything about it. So I think that's some of the uncertainty about how can you enforce that, right? How can you control what people are saying or not saying? And we'll expect that, if we're all abiding by the regulations and following the rules, that buyers agents won't spill the beans. They won't give nudge, wink, wink. You know how sellers were putting the Three Musketeers on TV.
Yeah,
So you walk in.
allegedly, we went over that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that ever really
Yeah, no, I don't.
was functional around here.
No, I don't think so either. And I think it's going to be the same with this new rule about communicating the offer. And I think people are going to abide by it by and large. There are bad inspectors, there are bad agents. I'm not particularly worried about that part of it. But that was some of the uncertainty. That was a lot of the uncertainty. It's like, how is this process going to work and who's going to enforce it? We're going to, everyone's going to be on, their best behavior. That's as we always are. Realtors have a very strong code of ethics. that licensed real estate salespeople do not have. So there's all, we're all supposed to be on our best behavior and following the rules. So you make the offer to purchase. You don't say anything about inspection or not inspection. When the seller accepts the offer, in that moment, they are required to give, there's a new form called the home inspection disclosure, something, or words to that effect. Basically, it's a new form that Mara's coming up with, where the seller and the buyer both sign this form that says the buyer has a right to a home inspection. And that 10-day thing that was originally in the legislation goes away, and it's one of the negotiated items, and it's going to be like a mutually agreeable time period. So I envision that being like a similar 7 to 10 days that we've always done. From accepted offer, you have this contingency window to get your inspection done. That's how I see it happening. And the agents I've talked to have said similar things. So you accept the offer. The seller and the buyer are now both required to sign this form that says the buyer understands they have a right to a home inspection. But here's the key point that I think there was a lot of confusion about. A lot of people thought that the buyer was required to have an inspection, and that's not true. They can still waive it. At that point, they can say to the seller, "Thank you for accepting my offer. I'm not going to have an inspection." And it's still the same conversation between the buyer and their agent about whether or not to do that. But the point is, it happens after the offer is accepted, not before. That's the key timing point. So if the buyer says, "I want my inspection," and they talk about the time period and it's 5 days or 7 days, then it's business as usual. Everything else is exactly the same. And I think that the difference is that the seller can no longer say offers without an inspection are stronger offers. That's what I think Mar was against, because the seller has that sort of negotiation point taken away from them by this legislation that says the buyer gets one whether you like it or not.
Yeah, it can't be used. Basically, it can't be used as a reason or not as a reason. It just cannot be a factor in the deal.
Right.
It happens after the offer is accepted, and it sounds like what you're saying is that form too. I guess that form, it sounds like, would outline the details of the inspection, right. And so that's why it would come after the offer.
That's the minute details like that are what's unknown. We'll see what Mark comes up with for the new forms, but I think it's going to be in that disclosure form that says the buyer has a right. I'm not sure how that piece will work out, but the real clear difference is that the offer to purchase no longer has a box to check for a contingency.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've already communicated with the team too, based on some conversations with attorneys, that like even now, like yes, the offer documents have the inspection contingency piece clearly in there as part of the addendum. Don't say any words in the offer about waiving. You can put gaps in there. Don't cross out inspection contingency. Nothing like that, because it's a dicey situation right now. And like you said, Ken, we're still a few more months away from it being official.
Yeah.
But you never know, especially if a deal drags out. Like, what's going to happen, right? So,
yeah.
It's
going to be effective October 15th, so it will not apply to any deals accepted up to October 15th. So, you could kind of make things up and you could say that the buyer's agent meets the seller's agent for coffee and hands them the offer form and says, "Hi, it's nice to see you. I'm waving." I think everyone's going to do things correctly. And, but to your point, Saad, those tiny details about where did you say the time period that you get? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of miraculous that we got as much clarity as we've gotten. And a lot of what I'm telling you came straight from Mar. There was a seminar they did for members a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it was their lead counsel giving the answers or giving the presentation. So there's going to be coming from Mar and probably GBAR, South Shore Realtors, the local realtor affiliate associations will offer more training between now and October that will have more of the details, once the forms are finalized and rolled out.
And that's a really important piece, I think, for anybody who's listening. Massachusetts.
So it's Massachusetts. Exactly right. Great point. It's Massachusetts, and I would just add another point is that if you're on listening to this discussion, please do not base your timing of whether you want to buy on this legislation. Like, follow the advice of your agents. Don't wait for the inspection to be allowed. You can still go through a process and still get an offer accepted and still get an inspection.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. July's been my third busiest month all year. I'm just jammed. So it's not. I think the market has already started shifting anyways towards buyers because things are staying on a little longer. There's been price cuts. Just from my like observant, observational perspective. I'm not an agent. I don't have the real close eye pulse on the data, but don't let this be a determining factor in whether you move forward and looking for a house, because you can still do what you need to do as we've always done for many years. This will just sort of formalize things, and I think it'll make, my personal opinions, it'll make things easier for everyone, just so that it takes away an unknown. It takes away a negotiation thing, yes, but it also gives you certainty. There's clarity. There's no uncertainty. You know what you can do. And buyers, if you still want to go forward without an inspection, that's entirely your choice. So just keep that in mind as you're going forward.
Yeah. Real quick, what up to Ryan Apple? Hello to Justin Nunez. Goodbye to Kim. Hello to Maggie. And hello to Ariel. What's up, everybody? Let's pick this apart for a little bit.
Sure.
Now, so inspection always happens before purchase and sale. You're writing the
Right.
purchase and sale date into the offer already.
Right.
So reasonable assumption is that the inspection is done at least a couple days before the purchase and sale.
Yep.
And then the window, I can see like kind of both sides. Like I'm pro, like everyone just kind of careless and just waving things. We do it here. We always try to make people as safe as possible and mitigate the risk as much as possible. So
Yeah.
whether that's you coming in for an inspection beforehand or a walkthrough, calling I've even sent you photos of things on a walkthrough of the house
Yeah.
beforehand just to like double check. But there's obviously going to be people that are less careful than that, and so there's a little more carelessness and disregard of the status of the house, and just we have to get it right. So I like the aspect of eliminating or limiting some of the mistakes that can be made there. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, the part of the negotiation is like, what does the seller side look for? Somebody who is one willing to give them proper money and closing dates and whatnot, but also is an easy partner in closing of the deal. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how quickly are you going to be able to go like, well, we can't get an inspection until 10 days after this purchase and sale, and then your threshold for you might be a nitpicky person, right? And the
Yeah.
GFI outlets are a huge problem to you
Yeah.
when they shouldn't be. So all of those variables could throw a wrench. We all adjust, but it's just going to throw a wrench in the negotiations and who you pick as a co-broke partner on a listing.
Yeah, it can definitely, there's definitely going to be some adjustment on
Yeah.
all sides, the seller, the buyer, the inspectors. In theory, if this increases the number of inspections that need to be done, and it might reduce inspector availability, I'm not sure that will really happen, because I think there are a lot of inspectors who are floundering, not being able to get work because so many people are waiving. So I think inspectors will be all on board about, I want to schedule it as quick as I can type of thing. But in terms of like, what does a seller now look for? The appraisal gap, cash offers, over asking. There's all the other aspects of the offer that can still have a great deal of strength and separation from other buyers. I've always felt that the inspection contingency was, in my view, a limited sort of ingenue view of how a transaction works, is that the inspection contingency is usually lower in priority, lower in importance than the appraisal gap. Because if an offer is 100K over asking and
Yeah.
the appraisal comes in 100K under,
True.
that waiving that is pretty
We,
important, and the
we
buyer's
luckily
risking
we
their
are
earnest money for that.
yeah luckily we are in times where that's much less
Okay.
that occurs much less.
Okay.
I think the huge issue there was when the COVID prices were shooting up at such a rate that you did not have historic comparables
Yeah.
to show
Yeah.
that it was valued, even though there were 20 offers
Yeah.
on this place and it needed to catch up. Now we're caught up. I don't know, Saad, do you want to speak on that at all? Like, it kind of, I don't
Yeah,
see it really anymore.
yeah. It's rare that something comes in low at this point. And again, usually when it did happen, you knew it was going to happen. So
Mhm.
so and so in those cases, you structure your offer accordingly, make sure
Yeah.
that there's a gap or what have you, or that you're prepared to cover that gap, if and when it came in. Again, I think like, the smart agents and the smart buyers were doing
Yeah.
that. But in terms
Right.
of inspections, I mean, this goes back to the original point and why I think this is even happening is, yeah, like a lot of people, first-time home buyers, or even if they weren't first-time home buyers, they really wanted a house, something that was like built in 1960, barely renovated, barely updated, what have you. I mean, but getting 20 offers on it, right? What
Yeah.
do you think? You're gonna have a chance to do your inspection? The answer is no,
Yeah.
right? You had to waive your inspection just to even be in the consideration set, and that's extremely dangerous for a lot of people. So, and it's just bad business, and I
Sure.
think and I think that's the crux of this, and I do think this is a good thing for the market and
Hmm.
for consumers and for real estate in general.
I yeah.
You'll
I
have
totally
better
agree.
you'll have better properties.
Yeah.
Renters are going to be in safer places, probably
Yeah.
less headaches for the actual landlords. You're going to have first time homeowners who are going to have their playbook in front of them to take care of their property. They're going to be so much more comfortable and well equipped. Like, these are good things that are going to happen. Yes, fine. Sellers will have take on a little bit more risk, but like, you probably should have to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, I would add one more reminder that just came to me is that when the buyer says, I want an inspection, they can still say what they're saying today, which is my repair threshold is 100K,
Right. Yeah.
or I'll lose my earnest money if I back out, or it's just a basic yes, no, I'm going forward. So you still have, as my understanding is, you're still going to have the parameters around the inspection, but so you can still, the agent and the buyer and the seller can still strategize on what is the best way to say I want an inspection. So it's like 5 days, and I'll risk my earnest money if I
But
back out, or whatever
but
it might
but
be.
so you're saying you can put that in the offer or you cannot?
Not in the offer. No, it doesn't go in the offer.
Yeah,
That's
so, that,
the
so then I guess my question would be, if it's not part of the offer, your offer is accepted, why would you have any of those terms on your inspection?
it helps. It gives the seller some peace of mind that you're going to P&S.
Yeah,
So
but they've
you're gonna,
already accepted said offer, right?
but they've accepted it. But the buyer can then say, "This is informational only. I'm not backing out. I just want to know what I'm dealing with."
Yeah,
And
I guess if that's what they want to do, but they totally do not. They're not competing with anybody at that
Yeah.
point, right? So they can.
right, so that's the yeah. So that's the part that's unclear, like how the strategy is going to shape over time as people get used to this. Like, what is it going to look like?
Yeah.
Once
Yeah.
people understand what the parameters are and what the options are, we're going to know a lot better what those details can look like when we see the new forms
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah. I guess a lot of this is TBD, and I think
Yeah,
the I would say it's clearly we're creating the right for buyers to have knowledge. It's a right for knowledge, but it's not a right for repair. And it's not a right
correct.
to get anything done on the house. It's just a
Exactly
right
correct.
to knowledge.
That's exactly right. That's a great way to put it. It's not a right. It doesn't require the seller to do anything to fix the house or take money off the agreed price. I mean, um, it's it's just for the buyer to know what they're dealing with, as opposed to the risk that they've been taking historically by waiving and not knowing anything. And
Yeah.
which is why I started doing that, what I call the peace of mind home consultation. So I come in after closing and do that walkthrough verbal only thing and give them the same headlines as if or 70% of the same information as if I was doing an inspection. And if I do 10 of those, 3 of them are upset because they had no clue that they needed another 10K or something or more for a roof or whatever it
Yep.
is. And they put every nickel they had on the table. So now they're getting that sort of risk mitigated for them by this process.
Mhm.
And then sellers, you know, it is true that they can't say no to an inspection. That's the key thing. But they still have the time between the offer and the P&S and whatever, back and I think there's going to be some back and forth about, okay, you want the inspection, now what are the details? How
Mhm.
long do you need?
Yeah.
What are you asking for? Is there a repair cap or whatever it might be? We just need to know what that looks like.
I suspect that there's going to be more backup offers. Like there will be a higher
Yeah.
priority for a backup offer in a multiple
Yeah.
offer situation. That would be one thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Two is that on the seller side, I just did my first. It was like a pre inspection of the home for the seller. or
Right.
sorry, not a pre-inspection, but like a walkthrough with the seller. And
Yep.
I've always thought if, regardless of negotiation, if you're the one to divulge the information, you have a leg up than if it's found out and you have to play defensively from that. So I think like
Yeah.
it's a really good idea for a seller to like get that walkthrough and then just be able to like be ahead of it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be a buyer's market at some point, and that's how sellers are going to differentiate
Yeah.
themselves, or one way. And that same peace of mind consultation is for sellers too, doing exactly what you described. And then that takes some of the onus off of the seller for this whole "do you want an
Right.
inspection" thing or not. So both sides can strengthen their position with knowledge,
Right.
and
Right.
and leverage it in the best way possible, so that everyone comes out with what they want.
Even I think even just the thought of like as a seller doing that pre-listing inspection or what have you,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and being able to say to buyers, I had the inspection report. I'll
Yeah.
I'm happy to even give it to you, right? Like something along those lines. Like, I mean, I think strategy is going to shift a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not sure that particular thing that you mentioned, Side, would actually happen, because most inspectors will say my report's good for my client and the day of the inspection only. So the seller, some inspectors will, you got to read the client agreement that the client signs, but sometimes it'll say right in the agreement you're not allowed to share it.
Oh, I see.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
But there's nothing stopping the seller from saying, here's my home inspection, here's the list I made from my home inspection,
of course.
you know,
That's
and any reasonable buyer who looks at the inspection report on the kitchen counter and looks at the list of the seller stuff is going to go, oh, cool, this was already done,
Yeah.
and this saves me the cost of an inspection and saves you the time of an inspection. For as long as it was like 2 weeks ago instead of 6 months ago, then that's a reasonable, for sure, that's a reasonable strategy for sellers to make, because that's exactly what buyers are doing, just from the other side of the deal.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that for
Yeah.
sure, but I would just be careful about reusing for a third party, because now if the seller gives that report to the buyer is then going to want to ask the inspector, hey, what about this? What about that? That starts to get a little squishy.
Down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. But I mean, the general strategy, pre-listing inspections, post-closing consultations, inspection prior to P&S, those are all different approaches to the same goal. And that, to me, is the fundamental thing. We all have the same goal: get a clean, good transaction where all parties win.
Mm-hmm.
And then the best way of doing that, you nailed it earlier, Mike, is knowledge makes everything easier.
Yes.
And makes everything smoother, and it makes everything transparent. And so that's I try to be as neutral as, you guys know me, I'm trying to be as neutral as possible about everything. And I'm just about transparency of information. I think that with time, sellers and seller agents might start to see that this process helps protect the seller too. An inspection is good for the seller when the buyer has the inspection, because it takes the onus off of the seller. Like you were saying earlier, Mike, about sellers being in reactive mode and having to respond to an inspection report from their buyer rather than doing their own. So the transparency puts the onus on the inspector to have correct information, clear information, and if there is a problem post-closing and the buyer needs to go after someone, they go back to the inspector, not the seller and not the agent. So I think the more transparency, the more knowledge, the better off we all are. And it's true.
Amen.
I'm an inspector. I obviously have like a clear bias towards having an inspection, but that's my fundamental philosophy.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's just you. I think that's like large majority. I mean, anybody representing a buyer, or if you are a buyer, like even if you're a seller, you would prefer, if you were buying something, to get an inspection, right? Like, it's just, I think you're 100% right, and that's what we communicate to our clients too.
Yeah.
But this is I think, I mean, like you mentioned this already. This is a moving target.
Right.
This is something that it's not final yet, but it seems like it's going to be. So I think people need to be watching this closely, and I guess look out for it in October.
I think it's 95% baked. I think it's basically just let us see the new forms, and then all shall be clear at that moment.
More about timing
Yeah.
and what the forms look like, what information is going to be on there, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
more to come.
Absolutely.
So thank you for the.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, hey, my pleasure, guys.
Yep.
Always love hanging with you guys.
And we'll be calling you in the middle of the night to ask you questions. So
Yes.
we just get ready for
Page
that.
47.
Yeah.
And this time we'll remember. This time
Yeah.